Thank you so much for streaming our latest message from First Baptist Church. Here at FBC, our mission is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. We do that by thinking big, thinking small, thinking in, and thinking out. We hope that this message helps you as you continue to grow in your faith. If you would like to stay connected to FBC, you can visit our website at fbcloyd.ca, look us up on Facebook and Instagram, or download our free mobile app. Now here's the latest from FBC. Enjoy.
Thanks, you guys. That was great. Welcome here this morning, everyone. Hey, that was awesome, having those child dedications. That's so cool to see parents taking that step and just the blessings that we have, not only just as families, but as a church family, you know, having these kids coming into the mix, and that's a beautiful thing. Last week, if you weren't here, man, you missed out on an awesome celebration service where we were able to just celebrate all that God has done for us here at FBC and just look back over the last year and see the way that He has blessed us. And I'd encourage you, if you didn't get one, grab one of these things. It's just a little sort of a review, a summary of 2016. It's available at the information center, and you can just celebrate with us all those different things, just the different way that He's been working. So please grab one of those things. We're in our series on 1 Peter. We're in week 5, I think, of our series, and I hope that you've been enjoying it. I hope that it's been significant for you. I've enjoyed it a lot, and it's been really cool. And before we dive in today, I just need to say a couple things. I've really appreciated having the privilege of being your pastor for a number of years now, and I'm going to miss you. Because as near as I can tell, this is a passage that pastors preach on when they want to die. So it's awesome knowing you, and I love you all. You have a nice life. If you got your Bibles with you, or you've got your phone handy, grab it and let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. And we're going to dive in. Read with me. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands. Yeah, now you're catching on, aren't you? Submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. So here you go, and there you have it. We're going to be talking about marriage. I prayed for the rapture this week like rarely have I prayed for it before. Nevertheless, here we are. So let's go. A couple things before we get right into the text here. Number one, if you're not married, don't just sort of zone out this morning. I'd encourage you to lean into this because it will apply to you as well. By the end, I trust that this will come together and you'll understand this in a way that will be suitable, that will be appropriate for you as well as a single person. And if you have any hopes or desires or anticipate somewhere in the future being married, then I would ask that you really pay attention, because I trust that this will enlighten your perspective on marriage. And if you are here this morning and you are no longer married, you set out on that voyage and somewhere along the way your ship sailed and then crashed hard on some rocks, let me again encourage you to lean in this morning. It's not meant to rub salt in the wound. It's not meant to undermine you or to belittle you or to cast aspersions on your ability to navigate marriage. That's not what this is all about. As a matter of fact, I want to remind you that God is in the redeeming business. And He will take you wherever you are at. And He will build you and He will grow you and into a life that you can look forward to and that you will be able to enjoy and be fulfilled in. So lean in. And again, in the same way as for singles, I trust that this is going to make sense for you by the time that we get to the end in your circumstance, no matter where you are. All right. Now, as I've mentioned before, and as we've seen before already in this series, this is the continuation of the previous chapter. We come to chapter 3, but Peter isn't shifting gears. He's continuing on. This chapter wasn't there when he was writing it. And so this is in the same spirit, it's in the same vein as what he's been talking about at the end of chapter 2. And so for a quick review, for those of you that haven't been a part of the series, last week when we looked at the end of chapter 2, we saw that Peter presented for us as Christians, those of us that have come to believe in Jesus Christ and have placed our faith in Him as our Savior, so that we can have the forgiveness of sins and have a restored relationship with God. Peter then says to us, here's the plan. Here's the plan now for your life. Now that you've made that decision, here's the plan. You are to go out and live such good lives. Go out and live such a good life. That's the plan for you. All towards the goal of living such a good life so that others would then encounter God through you. That they would see you and this good life, and though they have criticisms and though they have objections to what you are doing and how you're going about things, as they come and are confronted with your different perspective on life, that they would nevertheless then lean in and say, what is it about you that makes you do this? And that you would then be able to show them and share with them God, that they would be able to come to know Him as well. So that is the goal. That is the purpose. Now the strategy Peter pointed out, the way to go about that, how we can go about living such good lives that others would find God through us, is that we would live a life of submission. So the strategy is submission. And he outlines 3 different areas for submission. Submission to governments and authorities over us. Submission to masters for slaves. And now this morning we're going to see submission of wives to husbands. And then submission within the relationship as a whole. Peter outlined for us our impetus, the reason that we would do this, the reason that we would live that way would be, first of all, because it's God's will for our lives. He outlines that. He speaks to that specifically. And then he also says that a second impetus would be that we would live that way for Christ's sake, because our lives are now no longer our own. We are not living towards our own agendas, but we are living towards the agenda, the purpose that Christ has given us. So we are living now for His sake. And lastly, then, Peter outlined for us that we would follow Christ's example, the example of Jesus Christ Himself. So with that in mind, with that as a backdrop and a foundation, then we're going to come into chapter 3. Before we get there, and so it's on the record again, you need to understand that Peter nor Christianity endorse slavery or the subjugation of women or any other person. That is not what it's about. When we come to this whole area of submission, that isn't to say that Peter's endorsing slavery. He's not endorsing the subjugation of women, nor does Christianity. As a matter of fact, Peter was well aware that God was turning the paradigm upside down. And even in the Jewish law that God introduced for his people, there was revolutionary new customs, new rules and regulations that would give women rights within that system that they hadn't had before. And then when Christ came along, then it was wholesale change. It was even beyond that. Peter is well aware, very much clear on the fact that Christ came to bring emancipation for us all in every respect. That we wouldn't live under subjugation to anything, much less sin. And therefore, always remember and don't ever forget that as Peter is talking here, though he is doing it in such a way as to be careful, because at the time, the authorities, the rulers over them, would have been suspicious of Christianity. They would have been skeptical of it, and they would have been looking for any hint of subversion because they would have snuffed it out. And so Peter's saying he's being very careful. So he's addressing these topics within the context of the day. And he doesn't want to do that so that it would cause an issue that would amount to Christianity being obliterated by those over him. So that's the circumstance. But always remember, don't ever forget, Peter here is advocating not for a political revolution. He's not advocating for a cultural overhaul. He is advocating for a spiritual revolution. He is advocating at the very core of our being that we would be liberated spiritually from sin, that we would be out from under the bondage of sin in our lives, each one of us. And that as that happens, as that is able to take root and then grow through our society, as people come to embrace that, then he knows, he understands that that will lead to our emancipation as slaves, as spouses, into a whole other world order. So keep that in mind. Next, when it comes to submission, we also need to understand and keep in mind that as Peter is calling us to submission in these various respects, he is not saying that that submission supersedes our submission to God. All right? So that when we encounter in our lives where God says to do this and an authority over us says to do this, that then we are to continue to do what God says. That is not an excuse for us to ignore God. But what is then required of us is that we would then submit to the punishment or the penalty that comes from the earthly authority over us or the earthly person that we're in relationship with for the punishment of stepping out of that authority, for that insubordination. Our requirement then is that we would submit to that punishment. Not do what they say, do what God says, and then submit to the punishment that comes as a result. And therefore, he addresses suffering. We're going to see that again next week. So we need to keep those two things in mind. Now let's turn directly to the text, and we're going to have to fly. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. So as we come to this area of submission again, first of all, we see, and you need to understand, that this is not Peter calling wives to submission for submission's sake. Submission is not the end in and of itself. He is not just calling for a legalistic submission. It's not some arbitrary demand with that as the goal. He is calling wives to submission for a bigger purpose, towards a greater end. Now remember, that would make sense because as we look back at the culture in which he was speaking and to the audience that he was writing, submission was already the lot of women. That was life as they knew it. So he's not calling them to submission as if this is some new big deal. If he had been trying to bring that forward as here's something that's revolutionary for you girls, submit, they would have went, duh. Like, you mean, have you looked around, dude? That's my life. So that's not what he's driving at. Peter is going beyond the act of submission, and he is calling them to a new reason for their submission. He is looking for them to understand and submit for a whole new purpose, a greater goal. That's what he's driving at here. He wants them to change the reason that they do submit from it being a legalistic requirement to something that is far, far different, far, far deeper. William Barclay sums it up this way. Peter is not calling for a spineless submission, but as someone has finally put it, a voluntary selflessness. It is the submission which is based on the death of pride and the desire to serve. It is the submission not of fear, but of perfect love. I would read that again, but we don't have time. Submission, Peter is saying, should be the manifestation of a far deeper mindset and perspective. Namely, our desire to live for the sake of Christ and to follow his example. That we would emulate Christ, who gave himself sacrificially and willingly, volunteered himself, lay his life down, literally, absorbed the suffering that went with that. All so that we could be set free. That's what Peter's calling us to here. That's what he's looking for from you ladies, is submission on that level. Peter goes on and calls wives to be pure and reverent, by which he means that they would be chaste and that their lives would be ones of fidelity to their husbands. And reverent, meaning that they would reflect God and God's priorities in all aspects of their lives. That God's values would be their values. And that this wouldn't just be a legalistic thing, but that this would be a comprehensive way that they lived in every respect. Not just in relation to their husbands, but in all aspects of their lives. And then in verse 3, Peter switches gears, perhaps somewhat oddly to us. And he goes from talking about these things, seemingly such significant things, to wardrobe and jewelry and outward appearance. And in essence, what he's saying is he's looking at the ladies and he's saying, hey, girls, don't be so preoccupied with your appearance. And at this time, again, understand, that would have been revolutionary talk to these girls. What? Are you kidding me? Because again, at that point, they didn't have options. They didn't have ways to advance themselves, to move forward in society, save but by their appearance. That could move them up. That could get them noticed by the right people. And so they leaned into that. They're dolling themselves up any which way they can. And Peter comes along and says, no. Don't succumb to that. Trust God. Lean into him. Don't get preoccupied with that. Don't try and advance your cause this way. What matters is what's inside. What God is looking for from you is a gentle and quiet spirit. That's what he values. He's not focused on your outward appearance. Unlike the guys of the day that would have leaned into that process because every guy I know likes a trophy. And they would have been all over that. Yeah, girl, you go. Doll yourself up for me. And Peter's saying, no. That's not what it's all about. God's interested in this other stuff, a gentle and quiet spirit. And what's more, as a bonus, girls, it doesn't fade. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away. Lastly, Peter refers them to Sarah as someone to imitate, as someone that put her hope in God and trusted in him, not in her appearance, even though she was one hot tamale, as you remember, we talked about. And she submitted to Abraham. And you'll remember that too. We talked about the way that Abraham said, hey, just tell him you're my sister, regardless of the fact that might get a little dicey for you. It's going to work out better for me. And she did it not once, but twice. Like, are you kidding me? Okay, all right, here I go. I will submit. Okay, in 7 minutes or less. Husbands, verse 7, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, which is to say, Peter comes along and says, dudes, be considerate of your wives. Treat them with respect. Remember, they are your equal in this whole spiritual life that God is now calling you to. And again, this is our radical departure for men at the time. This would not have been the norm at all. They would have been sitting there, what? You know, it's kind of like your dog. In their world, when it came to women, man, it flowed their way, not towards the girls. It was all coming at them. They didn't regard. The women had to regard. I don't acknowledge. You acknowledge me. That's the way that we roll. And Peter's saying, no, not anymore. Peter calls for them to be considerate, which is to say, be sensitive to their feelings, and they're saying, they have them? Peter says, be mindful of their desires. Really? I might have to talk to them. Peter says, be attentive to their needs. And the guys are going, oh, wow. This is wholesale change. That was coming my way before. Now it's coming back at them. That's going to change. That's calling for a change in the way that they worked in their world. Peter sets out that husbands respect their wives as the weaker sex, which is merely, just understand this, that's not a slam. That was an indication, an acknowledgement of their general physical weakness, that they are the weaker girls than guys, weaker than guys in most respects, physically speaking. And in that day and age, men had privileges that girls didn't. Peter's saying, you guys need to defer your privileges. That means that you can let them sit on the softer cushion, not on the floor beside you. As you're on tour, heading out, how about you let them ride the donkey or in the chariot, not run or walk beside you as you ride, boys. As you've got to do all this work over there, how about this? How about you step up and do some of the work, some of the heavy lifting, not them. You don't just supervise anymore. And then Peter finally points out that unlike other religions, the Jewish religion, the Greeks, the Romans, all their different religions and sects and so on, that unlike them, where the women had no opportunities or rights, that under this regime, under God's world order, women have an equal seat at the table. They are right there alongside of you. They are your equals. And you need to understand that. Now, this morning, we can get fixated here, and usually by this point we are, because of the incendiary nature of what's just been spoken and said. Submit, whoa, and we're bogged down on that. We're going round and around on that. And the guys are saying, yeah, girl, that's the way it works. And the girls are saying, over my dead body. And we go back and forth and back and forth and that. So I'm cautioning you today, don't get bogged down in those details. They're great examples. That's what Peter's given them to us for. Here's how this works. You get it? You get it? You understand what I'm saying? But what we need to understand, what we need to see there is that it's not the details. It's the intent behind them. It's the perspective behind them. It's the foundation for them. That's what we're trying to get through. That's what we need to appropriate for ourselves. And so that as the verse starts for men, in the same way, guys, in the same way that we're asking the girls to submit voluntarily and selflessly, you're doing the same, dude. With the same spirit of voluntary selflessness, you start serving your wife. With the same selflessness that comes from the death of pride and the desire to serve, that's how you want to engage in your relationship. With the same selflessness that comes from perfect love, not fear of the law, but perfect love, because you are laying down your life for them, because you love them in the same way, in the exact same way that Jesus Christ laid down his life for us for no other reason than he loved us. That's how we are supposed to interact and engage with one another. And then Peter points out one more thing. He's not quite done. He tags on one more line at the end. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Here Peter's saying, hey everyone, you need to do this stuff because there's a consequence if you don't. And interestingly enough, this applies to both of us, guys and girls. We could take these verses and we could reorder them. So that as we come to this verse, we could see that it applies every bit as much to girls as it does to guys. I think Peter rightfully sticks it in this section on guys, because at that time, of course, again, the girls had to stay in good standing with the dudes. If they stepped out of line, there was a price to pay. Whereas there was no imperative for the guys. Treating them right, treating them proper is exactly how I do it. Whatever I do, that's deemed right and proper. But we're not leaving that there, because we could reorder these verses and understand them exactly backwards. Where the same thing that apply to the girls now apply to the guys. And the same things that apply to the guys now apply to the girls. We go back and forth. And to better understand this, nuts. To better understand this, we need to flash back to Matthew 5 again, really quickly. And you saw we did that last week. As Peter is outlining this for his audience, he is thinking back to that time when Christ is teaching in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And he's reflecting back on that time. He's reflecting back on what Christ has said and that he remembers. And so if we turn back to Matthew 5, and if you've not read this passage, you've got to read it because it is revolutionary. But if you go back to Matthew 5, verse 21 to 24, it says this: "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.'" Now this is Jesus talking. "But I tell you, Jesus tell you, that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." Not just if you murder them. If you're angry with them, you'll be subject to judgment. "Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fires of hell. Therefore, verse 23, if you are offering your gift, now this is where it comes home. This is where it comes home to roost, and we start to understand how seriously God takes our relationships with one another. Jesus says, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there at the front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. So Jesus comes along and says, before you come to me, the offering, when they were bringing their gifts and their offerings, that was the people coming to God. We do it now through prayer. And Jesus says, before you come to me, if you remember that there's an issue between someone that you have a relationship with, then what you best be doing is leaving that offering here now and going back to them and getting it figured out. Getting that figured out. We have a tendency today to think that if I am right with God, as long as I'm okay with God, it doesn't matter about these other relationships down here. It doesn't matter how I'm doing with my wife. It doesn't matter how I'm doing with my husband. It doesn't matter how I'm doing with anybody else. As long as I'm okay with God, well, then I'm good. And God says, whoa, no. If you're not doing well with one another, we're not doing well either. And so we want to try to go to God. We want to keep praying. We want to keep asking him for whatever we want, talking to him about the things that we're concerned about. And that's hindered. Our prayers are hindered. It's not getting through. Not nearly the same way that it is when we have these relationships in order, when they're working together. When we're in the right place, God says that just doesn't float. And it makes sense. Because in essence, what happens is when we decide that we don't have to be in right relationship with one another, then we belittle the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made on our behalf. We cheapen his sacrifice. Because what we've done in essence is that we've said, it's okay, God, it's all right for you to die for them. That's fine. You can sit down and lay down your life for them. But they're not worth it to me. I am above them. And so what happens here, what's going on, is that Christ is exposing the root of the problem all through this passage. He's saying what the problem here, guys, is what you need to pay attention to is your pride. It's about your pride. And he's given us marriage and relationships so that we can see the root of our problem, so that we can see the depravity of our human nature, so that we can see our deficiencies, that we begin to understand our selfishness, so that then we can begin to deal with it. So that then we can make the adjustments that we need to become like our example, Jesus Christ. Gary Thomas wrote a book called Sacred Marriage, the subtitle of which is, What If Marriage Was to Make You Holy, Not Happy? Guys, I would really encourage you guys, think about that. Consider that. The world tells us every day, all day long, that marriage is about making you happy. It's all about you. It's all about you. Your spouse is going to respond to you. They're going to meet your needs. They're going to fulfill you, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And it's not the way it works. Put some thought into the idea that Christ has given. If you're married here today, thank the Lord for that. Thank you, God, for that blessing. Because it is an opportunity for you to find out how to become more like Christ every day, every day, every day. As he helps you through those relationships to root out the pride in your life that messes you up and that hinders your prayers and that keeps you from finding an even more rewarding relationship with Christ himself and keeps us from finding a way to share Christ with the world around us. Because that's what it's about. That's our goal. all about Jesus Christ. It's all for his sake. And so as we enter our relationships, our marriages and everything, our deal is, the whole opportunity and request is that we would lay down our lives, get rid of the pride, serve one another voluntarily so that our world can find God. Let's pray. God, this morning again, I know that this is an incendiary issue. This is a volatile topic. We come into it with perspectives and opinions. God, I would pray this morning that you would help us to reevaluate those and to come in line with who you are and what you're calling us to. That you would help us to see our relationships as a magnifying glass, to be able to evaluate ourselves and where we're at with you, to see our selfishness and to be able to put it aside and serve one another, and to do so in a winsome way that would help spouses that don't know you yet to come to you, that would help the world around us to see you and to come to you as well. All because of what you've done for us. And I ask these things now, God, in your Son's name and for his sake. Amen. Have a great week. And I hope I see you next week.